All right, welcome back to the Win or Lose podcast. WSU 87, Pacific 70. Cougs get a win and they're back in the race for fourth place in the WCC. So let's take a look at what happened. It was basically exactly what David Riley wants to see from the offense. Lots of three-point shooting, not a lot of turnovers. WSU finished with 18 assists and only 7 turnovers, only 2 turnovers in the first half, which allowed them to extend to an 11-point lead. And then just lights out shooting. A lot of that has to do with the lack of turnovers. And a lot of that just has to do with running clean offense and getting open looks. I'd say 70% of the threes that WSU took were just open shots you'd expect them to make. There was actually a couple of shots that Ace took that you would have liked him to make. Vavers was fantastic. He shot 8 of 12, 5 threes. He just continues to be incredible, even though he wasn't against Gonzaga last week. This is a big bounce back for WSU after that debacle against Gonzaga. I didn't record a pod because I kind of thought the season was over. It looked like a team, they've lost so many of these close games to Santa Clara and St. Mary's earlier in the year, and you're just like, well, at least you can see they're growing, they're playing well as a team, and at least they're playing hard. And against Gonzaga, they did not play hard. The turnovers were disgusting. Anybody who watches that game was disgusted. The commentators ran out of anything to talk about halfway through the first half. It was just a really abysmal performance. So for WSU to come back against a 17-11 Pacific team, having a great year in the driver's seat for fourth place at the WCC, a lot to play for, and play a really strong game was super impressive. So big shout out to David Riley for getting the guys to play this hard this late in the year. In the fourth place is within reach. Pacific is 8-8. And WSU 7-8, and now WSU holds the tiebreaker. Pacific still has Gonzaga, so seems reasonable that WSU should be able to pass Pacific, but the problem will be passing Oregon State and San Francisco. San Francisco is losing to Gonzaga as I speak, so they will be behind WSU, but Oregon State holds the same record as the Cougs, and unfortunately, they have the tiebreaker because of that debacle of a 17-point loss. 17-point lost lead, I should say. So WSU's really hurt their chances here, but despite all of that, they still have a chance to get into that top 4 seed where they'd only have to win 3 games to win the WCC tournament and make the NCAA tournament, which is something that I've been preaching on this podcast and to my friends for the past couple of weeks. But I took a look at it to see, I was just trying to figure out this team from an analytics perspective because they're 124th in KenPom, which isn't really bad. And it should be given their record. In analytics, they're around a bunch of teams with winning records. So WSU at 12-16 stands out a bunch of teams who are 16-12. But I was trying to figure out why WSU wasn't so low in the rankings despite their record, and why it feels like they're pushing being a decent team, if that makes sense. Not a great team, but like they could have been a half decent team. And could they actually go on a run in the WCC tournament? The argument for yes would be, okay, well, they're going to get in, they're going to make a bunch of threes like they did tonight, and that all sounds well and great, but BCU is 0-5 in quad 1 games, and 0-8 is 0-8 in quad 2. So for people who don't know what the quads are, it's what the NCAA uses to rank wins when they're looking at a team's resume. So quad 1 obviously being the strongest win, the higher ranked the opponent, and quad 2 being this this is just that second tier. WSU is 0-13, and I thought Pacific would maybe be a quad 2 since they have a solid team, but they're not. So all of WSU's wins are either quad 3 or quad 4, and you could argue that WSU lost some close games in there, but I don't know. 0-13 kind of speaks for itself against quality opponents, but I consider Pacific a quality opponent for where we're at as a program. WSU gets the win tonight. Audrey Rodriguez, my takes, continues to look amazing. 5 assists, no turnovers. Again, didn't have a great game against Gonzaga. Nobody did. But he was fantastic again tonight on defense. Got some really nice layups, looked confident. It was great to have Thrasterson back out there just from having another ball handler, having another shooter. It helps the spacing. It helps you not stay out of foul trouble. And that's something that could be a big deal for WSU, who plays St. Mary's on Saturday, because they didn't have him last time they played. And that could be something that could really help them guard the three-point line a little bit stronger, just another ball handler, someone else who can shoot free throws late in the game, maybe relieve Audrey late in the game. So having him back is huge. It's great that he's still, he looked seamless. He fit right in. He had a little bit of a minutes restriction, but he fit right in. And Pacific shot 8 of 21 from 3. Obviously, the much maligned three-point defense of WSU stood strong. Thrasterson helped with that. Some of that was missed shots. Some of that was WSU pressuring. WSU was definitely pretty strong defense inside. So great win for WSU all around. I mean, you can take what we can get at this point. Abysmal crowd. And Cougar fans better step up. If they want this next round of realignment over the next 5 years, going into this new Pac-12, things look great on the football side. We're investing in the stadium. We're investing in the roster, and people are excited, and that looks great, and we're going to build a football brand that is appealing in realignment in 5 years. Basketball feels like it's heading in the opposite direction. I've defended David Riley. I think he's a good coach. I think this roster is more talented than some of the WSU rosters that I've seen in the past in the bad days, but there was less than 2,000 people in Beasley tonight, and you're watching some of these teams that are coming into the conference. Gonzaga has the Kennel, and Utah State has the Herd, and they're incredible, and they're loud. And Penny Hardaway, with the coach of Memphis, just the other night said it was the loudest gym he'd ever played in. And tonight, there's just no one in Beasley, and I know it's Pacific, and I know it's a Wednesday, but I just can't think of a better thing to do as a student on a Wednesday than just go to the game with my friends. And if you were a player on the team, if you were Ace, if you were Ree, if you were ND, if you were all these guys, Yalaho, who are going to get offers to go elsewhere for more money, and you walk out to that crowd, I know a lot of that's because of their record, but what would make you want to stay? And I think Coug fans have to ask themselves that. Their level of investment matters, and their level of investment is what's going to drive what the program could be. If you want to be, in the stands and buying tickets and making noise. Like, WSU's a good home team. They're 9-5 at home, and obviously they're playing a WCC schedule, but they almost knocked off Santa Clara at home last Saturday. I guess 2 Saturdays ago now. And they're going to have a chance to knock off St. Mary's this Saturday at home, their final home game. But they shoot well at home. They play close games. Even their losses aren't blowouts outside of a couple. They were good at home last year. So I just think Coug fans have got to look in the mirror and say, what do they want this program to be? And if they want to make this a winning program like it was when we were in the tournament 2 years ago and Beasley was jumping, their involvement is a part of that. And it matters to the players. It matters to the players when they're on the court. It matters to the recruits who are coming to visit. And it matters to the coaches. And so I think the level of investment is not good enough for a team that's fairly entertaining. The metrics actually think they're not as bad as their record says, despite the fact that they just haven't beaten any good teams, but they've beaten all the bad teams. So it should tell you that they're an average, right in the middle, and they've had the opportunity to knock off Santa Clara or St. Mary's, like I referenced earlier in the year. So I think they're fun to watch, and I think the more support they got, the harder they would play, the easier it'd be for David to recruit. And a lot of Cougar fans seem to be really, anti-David Riley and all this stuff. Like, how are we, we went from being in this in the Pac-12 to now we're this in the WCC. And it's like, I don't want to disclose things that I've been told privately, but from what I hear, our WCC, the NIL that we're spending isn't even in the top half of the WCC. So what do you expect David to do? Why do Cougar fans expect the team to have this level of success that is never been sustained in the history of the program? And the NIL isn't even in the top half of the conference. Hard recipe to have success. So I don't understand why the expectations are high. And I want to set the expectation to be high. I think we should be a better team. And I actually do think, despite the fact that the roster isn't maybe technically as expensive, I think we're going to look back in a year and say, Ace got paid, EY got paid, ND got paid, Vavers got paid, and we're going to say, damn, that roster was probably over $1 million, and they weren't getting that, and, we weren't as good, and part of that's on David, but it's just, we're going to look back and say this roster was actually undervalued for what they were getting paid, and that's the difference though. If we had a little bit more money, you could have filled out a backup big. You could have filled out a true point guard who could run the offense, who's not a true freshman. I know Ace is fantastic. Another wing defender. Just, there's a lot of places this team could have filled in around the edges. They needed senior leadership. They sorely missed that. Someone with experience. They're one of the least experienced teams in the country. Without investment, that's not going to happen. And they're left with 4 to 5 really strong players. Guys who I hope come back. I hope we get another year of Morton. I hope we get another year of Yalaho, Okafor, Vavers, Glass, but you just don't know if that's going to happen. So all of that is unfortunate, but that's just the reality of the situation. And hopefully Coug fans will show up Saturday as the Cougs take on St. Mary's. It could be their first really big win since last year for David Riley and a win that could propel them into fourth place in the WCC, which been over a million times how important that could be. And, any semblance of a positive trajectory or going into next year would be huge for David, for recruiting, for retaining, all those things. And you see what it looks like tonight. Like, that was a pretty basketball game to watch. WSU was really, really strong on offense, and they played good defense. And when they play well, the ball's flying around and they're not turning it over. It's a fun watch. And that's a recipe that can have success against better teams. They haven't been ready to make the jump this year. So we'll see if they're able to accomplish that on Saturday. And that's all for basketball. I did want to touch on baseball super quick, who picked up a big 8-4 win at Alabama to start their campaign last week. They dropped the doubleheader on Saturday, which was unfortunate because if you watched WSU baseball last year, you knew the bullpen was thin and they didn't have really enough arms in the back end. They had all these leads and they blew a bunch of them. They actually started the year at number 4 Arkansas, had the lead 2-1 in extras, walked the bases loaded, lost. And that kind of just defined their season. They got off to like an 0-8 start, lost a bunch of close games, like 3 walk-offs, and they never really recovered from that, even though I think they had a half-decent team. So hopefully, WSU getting out to a big lead and holding on. Max Hartman, second base, 3 for 3, home run, I believe, and a double. And they were saying, they thought he was going to be a pro. So really cool that he stayed. And someone that will be fun for people to go out and watch at Bailey Brayton this year. Lots of returners for WSU, Cresswell amongst others. So it could be an exciting year. WSU starts with 19 games on the road. I don't think their first home game is for over a month. So if you look at it, they have some quality opponents. They play Cal Poly 4-game series this week. And I'm just looking at these games. I'm like, come out of it 500. Split series and come back to Pullman, a game or two over 500. And then you're going to rip through a Mountain West schedule with a lot of home games against teams like Air Force. And not to be disrespectful to Air Force, it might look bad if they come back and whoop us at home now. But there's a lot more opportunity for wins later in the schedule. So weather this road test. I think the win at Alabama is a great sign. And getting blown out in a doubleheader with the limitations of the roster makes a lot of sense. You're just going to run out of bullpen guys. You need a really good start, and then, just to use a couple relievers to beat a team like Alabama, and you use all your best relievers, in the first game against Alabama. So promising sign. Would not be discouraged by the doubleheader losses. We'll see how they fare this week, but this has been a long rebuilding project for WSU baseball, which used to be the premier program of the university, and something I think we all want to see prosper and succeed. Easily our best facility on campus at WSU. Bailey Brayton is a great place to watch a game. So hopefully they can surprise some people here. They were picked to finish 8th in the Mountain West. The Sports Illustrated article that was written about the Cougs upsetting Alabama was pretty funny. And the Alabama commentators were calling us the Huskies. It was the classic Coug upset. Even though Alabama might not be one of the best teams in the SEC from what I've read, going on the road and beating an SEC team, I think shows that you have a level of talent that they haven't had the past couple of years. I guess they've had some talented players who have moved on, but hopefully as a team, they can really build and grow through these first 19, 20 games before they get back home to Bailey Brayton. And then the magic number to make the postseason is like 35 wins. Depends on your strength of schedule. So we'll monitor that as these first road games go on and see how they're doing in the RPI and stuff like that. Yeah, and I think that's all I had. I wanted to thank everyone for listening. I got a couple of interviews that I'm trying to get lined up for next week. Won't be a pod after the St. Mary's game, but we'll probably try to do one after the game next week on top of a couple of, I think, pretty big interviews that will be fun for WSU fans to listen to. Yeah, thank you guys for listening, and go Cougs.